Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome, everyone. This is DB, the Dirty Bird. Welcome to my new side project presented by the SitDownMarksPodcast, where ever so often I'm going to bring you a quick show where each episode we're going to take a look back into the vault, back into the archives, and I'm going to talk about all the popular and not so popular characters of professional wrestling from days past. We're going to be talking heels, baby faces, managers, talent enhancers, commentators, tag teams, promoters, and everything in between, talking about their contributions to the world of pro wrestling, the legends and not so legends, if you will, of the territory. So, Marks Mafia, let's take a ride, man. Let's get nostalgic. And I want to present to you the very first episode of DB's Territory Treasures. Let's get into it. Today's Territory Treasure is Andre the Giant.
Hey, yo.
If I can be serious for a minute.
Oh, yeah. Acknowledge me.
What's going on, everybody? Thanks for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for listening on Apple, Spotify, Audible, all those podcast platforms out there, including SportzWire Radio. I want to thank you guys for tuning in and checking out my new adventure, DB's Territory Treasures, where I'm going to be talking about all the wrestlers from the past in the vault, the good, the bad, all that in between. We're going to be talking about them. So today's very first episode, I'm going to be talking about Andre the Giant. Now, let's talk about Andre for a second. Well, actually for a while here. But look, let's talk about what we already know about Andre, right? His look, how large he was, the spectacle of a man that he was. You know, his iconic one strap singlet that we all remember. We all remember that, you know, his feuds. He was French. You know, a lot of us remember him being with Bobby Heenan. So a lot of people outside of wrestling know him as a Hollywood star. You know, he was in The Princess Bride. A lot of people remember, you know, we'll be talking about that. But we also know him as Giant Machine in The Machines for all us hardcore wrestling fans out there. But, you know, what else do we know about Andre the Giant? So let's jump into it, ladies and gentlemen. So Andre was born May the 19th, 1946 to two parents, Boris and Marion, which themselves, you know, not too bad for height. You know, Boris was 6'2" and Marion was 5'2". Andre's grandfather was 7'2", though. So he got a little bit of height from there. You know, Andre obviously was already 6'2", I think. Maybe by the time he was 12, and I think he shot up a couple more inches just right after that. But Andre suffered from a term called giantism. The correct medical term for it is, well, try to pronounce this right. My wife told me to make sure I pronounce this right. Acromegaly. That still may even be wrong. It doesn't sound like the way she said it, but basically what it is it's excess growth hormone in your body, you know, that your body produces. And this is kind of what made Andre, you know, such a large man. You know, really makes me sad because had Andre been born in today's times, you know, there's a lot more medicine and stuff that, you know, he could have taken to, you know, to control it. But, you know, back in those old days, they didn't know a whole lot about it then. They didn't know a whole lot about his particular, you know, situation. But that's, you know, he was born with that. So that's what, you know, made him like such a large man. But the Territory Treasure, Andre, definitely was that. He was the Territory Attraction, maybe even the original, you know, Territory Attraction. One of the probably one of the biggest ticket movers in history. I mean, this guy, you know, if you saw him on a card, you know, you wanted to go see him. You wanted to go see how big he was. If you've never seen him before, you know, you really wanted to go see him. But, you know, just an original attraction, you know, a must-see type of icon, you know, between, I would say, like probably the 70s, you know, to 90s. But, you know, he was oftentimes billed as 7'4", anywhere from 500 to even 520 pounds. You know, he was from the Grenoble and French Alps, as I hear Howard Finkel, you know, announce. Every time I hear Andre being announced, I hear Howard Finkel in the back of my head, you know. But huge territory traction. He was on his own for a little while, and then he was under the tutelage of Vince, and Vince loaned him out to other promotions. They would have to pay a fee to him, then they would have to pay a fee to Andre, and then on top of that, take care of Andre, whatever he needed, that kind of stuff. So that was so that was good for Andre. But Andre during that time, he was the man. He was the wrestling. He dominated the wrestling scene. He was the guy that you wanted to have on your card, because he sold tickets, and everybody either wanted to see the big man dominate or the big man fall, one of the two. But everybody was buying tickets to see which one was going to happen. So. And you got to think about Andre, too, in this sense, too. In the 70s and 80s, we know Macho Man, Stone Cold, Undertaker, those names will be synonymous in our wrestling mouths, if you will, forever and ever. And, Andre's in that group. You say the Giant, you think of Andre. You know what I mean? That's just... he's like Macho Man. Everybody knows who the Macho Man is. I mean, that name just like transcends, and Andre's right up there too, with it. So, we talked about, Andre, being a big deal in the 70s, 80s, in case you didn't know his real name, Andre Roussimoff. I'm probably not pronouncing that either, but Roussimoff. The Giant moniker basically came, because he was a real life giant, basically because, he stuck out, everywhere he went, you got to think about too, the uncomfortableness that Andre went through as a wrestler, in those times. These times nowadays in 2025, we could be a little more accommodating to Andre, being, as big as he was. But you have to think about this guy sitting in, these plane seats, not being able to use public bathrooms, being mauled wherever you go, like everybody knew who Andre was, you know what I mean? So, just the uncomfortableness had to be crazy, and that just makes me have even more respect for him, like what he had to go through to give back to pro wrestling, like people like Yokozuna too. To me personally, if I got the mic on my own today, I think he's one of the guys that's very underappreciated, as to what he did to popularize wrestling. I think the fans should be talking about him more, in the old days. He should be, as being talked about as, kind of one, the GOATs, the pillars, he may not, you know what I mean? But he helped put, wrestling on the map. But I mean, the guy, he was the 8th wonder of the world, right? I mean, he had that nickname. Like we even care about the other 7. Really, right? Like, the 8th wonders world is all we know about. I think the 9th might have been China. We cared about that one, but as far as the rest of them, who cares? Andre's the one. This guy had a 24-inch shoe size. Shaq wears a 22. Shaquille O'Neal, just kind of put it in perspective for you. About how he had to get custom made everything. Not because he was Ric Flair, but because to be comfortable. His recliner at home, was specially made for him. And another thing too is he was in the mainstream. He brought movies to wrestling. He was in The Princess Bride. I'm sure you remember this clip.
If they are, we all be dead.
No more rhymes now, I mean it.
Anybody want a peanut?
Yeah!
Anybody want a peanut? I mean, I know you remember that from The Princess Bride, but like I said, mainstream. He was, one of the first wrestlers I remember being on like a movie. He was on the Fall Guy, like a TV Guy series. Fall Guys, for all you new cats, it was an old TV series from the old days. Just a legend amongst legends, man. I feel like all these guys, you hear them talk, they all look up to Andre. They all stood up straight when Andre walked in the room. You know what I mean? So he was the boss. I mean, literally kind of, And I think too, like, you hear a lot of people's, I'm an old guy, you know what I mean? So you hear a lot of people's Mount Rushmores, like Andre's on mine. He's got to be, man. Like, I feel like we're not where we are today, without Andre doing the contributions that he did, to the business, Like I said, one of the original Hollywood stars as a wrestler, he transcended his likeness to still being on brands and video games and movies and, things to this day. Anybody says or thinks something, about the Giant, Andre's kind of who you think, you hear the word Giant, stories of Andre, absolutely legendary, from people he didn't like to the card games. He didn't like Boss Man because he thought Boss Man was coming for his spot. Always thought that was a cool story. He wasn't ever a big fan of Hogan, shocker. But people he did, he was a big fan. He liked Bret Hart, Bruno Sammartino. I've always read he was very fond of Bobby the Brain Heenan. These legendary card games, card games, they always like to play cards. Everybody always had to play cards. And if you got to play cards with Andre, he let you in his table. That was like a big deal. You know what I'm saying? So, which I think is just super cool. Outside of that too, you hear the story, he drank anywhere from 119 to 200 beers in a sitting before. I think his family acknowledged 119 once, that he, that's crazy. It's crazy, man. Like being able to drink that many beers. Holy shit. Like, I'm good on a 6-pack right now. Like, wow. But, WrestleMania 3, that's what we all remember. Mostly 1987, Pontiac Silverdome, brother. The body slam Hulk Hogan says he didn't know anything about, ended up happening, sending Hulkamania into, another stratosphere. I mean, these feuds, he had so many, they were legendary. Remember, he had like a kayfabe storyline one time where he had a kayfabe heart attack because he was scared of snakes when he was feuding with Jake Snake Roberts. Like, just amazing, man. Although I know like Hogan was probably his most popular feud, from Mania 3, the visual of, I always remember the visual of after he slams Andre and gets the pin, crowd goes crazy. Andre and Bobby are riding the cart back to the back, and people are just pelting him with stuff. And, and I'm like, just, I always like to go back and just watch, like, did Andre really know what he did for the business? Did he really know what he did for us? You really, what I mean? Like, how cool would he think it is the way it looks now? It's just wild, man. Like, I remember his Mania 6, his big face turn, when he turned on Heenan. It was cool, man. He had an undefeated streak for like almost 15 years, I think, in the WWE one time. There's a story up there too that he volunteered to do a string of house matches just to be able to get the Ultimate Warrior over during the summer. He would just show up, Andre come in there, Warrior come in there and squash him and leave, just to help build the aura of Ultimate Warrior. They were squash matches, think about that. Super cool. He teamed with Giant Baba like at the end of his career in All Japan. That's freaking cool. In 1974, man, he had a Guinness Book of World Records record. He was the highest paid wrestler in 1974 ever. He made $400,000 in 1 year. That's crazy. It's insane money for back 1974. I was negative 1 years old, but wow, man, you think 400K in that time went a lot of way, man. Like, he might as well have been a millionaire, right? Another thing I always think too is, like, I grew up on WCW. I remember when they debuted Paul White, the Giant, whatever you want to call him, and they debuted him as Andre the Giant's son. I'm like thinking, he don't look that much like him, So I thought that was funny. The first member of the WWE Hall of Fame in 1993. If there's anybody that deserves to go in first, it's him. I remember watching that, thinking, I thought that was really cool. His last tag title match was with his last title was with the tag titles with Haku in 1990, but that was I thought was really cool. Two of the toughest SOBs in the business right there as tag champs. Take them off them, right? Sadly we lost Andre in 1993, man. I remember I was 18 years old when I found out about this. He passed away in a Paris hotel. He was only 46 years old, man. Like it's not very, he didn't live very long, man. Like to have Andre around a lot more, to appreciate him more. But, the world of wrestling lost a huge icon that day, man. That, he will forever be a pillar of the success of pro wrestling. And, I hope that we continue to remember him for what he did for wrestling. Andre truly is and was, and will be probably the ultimate territory treasure, while we're talking about it. But before we go home here, I want to say, the first time I seen Andre on TV, I think he had the wild hair going on, really, he had like red or blue trunks. I can't remember, but just a scary individual. And I was scared for all my baby faces to get around him or wrestle with him, or, always thought Andre was going to hurt him, and then flip, and then I'm, 1987, I'm 12 years old, and I'm watching WrestleMania 3 and, and Hogan slams him and, it's the aura of thinking, of course he got body slammed before, but, like I remember the body slam challenge with him and Big John Studd, another guy I don't think he was very fond of, but I just remember looking at him thinking, wow, like how scary. And this guy wrestles, you know what I mean? And he's going to hurt people. Like who can beat him ever? So, but I want to get you out of here on this each and every episode here. I want to do a spotlight segment where, I talk about, maybe what each individual person had, an impact on me. So I want to tell you a cool story, man. So the spotlight segment for this, for Andre the Giant is, I grew up in North Carolina, man, in a town called Lincoln. Andre had a ranch in Ellerbe, North Carolina, which was actually only about 2 hours east of me in eastern North Carolina, just north of Rockingham, North Carolina. And I remember when I found out about it, I thought, wow, one of the most popular wrestlers ever lives in a ranch about 2 hours east of me, and he's a North Carolinian like me. Like how wild is that? Let me tell you about Ellerbe though, man. This little bitty town, it's like 1,000 people. Andre lived there because he thought this farm reminded him of his homeland in France. His ashes are actually spread there. There's so many pics of him like on a four-wheeler, because he would ride his four-wheeler across the property. He had a lot of things customized. This is where he had a nice recliner. This place was big enough to accommodate him. He could move freely throughout the house. And there was just so many pics of him, like on his four-wheeler. He loved animals, and he had animals on the property with him. And I just thought it was the most coolest, like just, what a way to, finish out your life, on a farm that, reminds you of home and you live freely. And just thought it was cool, man. And it always blows my mind that Andre the Giant lived like 2 hours east of me, man, But the cool thing I want to let you guys know, man, if you're ever around Ellerbe, North Carolina, in eastern North Carolina, Andre's got an exhibit at the Rankin Museum of American Heritage in Ellerbe, and there's some memorabilia there, and they just kind of, make sure his legacy lives on. And just want to say, how cool is that? I mean, the ranch has since been, sold. It's got new owners. Andre's ashes are still there. Rest in peace to Andre forever. If you are into, kind of some history on Andre, his family runs a Instagram account. It's called Andre the Giant Official. So go check it out there. I believe you can get some merch still through Pro Wrestling Tees. So, yeah, so that's going to do it for Territory Treasure for Andre the Giant. If you got a Territory Treasure suggestion, hit us up at SitDownMarks on all our social media, or dbonthemic@yahoo.com. I want to thank you guys all for joining me. I'm DB. I want to thank you, everybody listening on Apple, Spotify, Audible, iHeartRadio, SportzWire, all those podcast platforms out there. I want to talk to you guys next time. Really appreciate you joining me here today. If you got an idea, please send it over. We'll check it out. I want to thank everybody. And please join us next week as we're going to be back with episode number 160 of the Sit Down Marks podcast, talking about who's up next to get signed in the world of professional wrestling. Once again, I am DB. We'll talk at you next time when we dive into another Territory Treasure.